as well.
To the Mayor, to Councillor, I apologize. I don't know whether this particular area was a fill or a cut. Off of there was so much debate over that drain that we're really not in a finalized state.
No, for sure
which sort of goes with why the Public Works is recommending that we retain those lands, because there's so much outstanding with respect to the drainage at this point.
I agree with you, and we would be retaining the lands, but I guess I'm trying to lead us to a conclusion that there perhaps would be the necessity of filling part of that area in any event, should the Ferris Street drain ultimately proceed, or should it not, and we ultimately decide to construct the next piece of Walmsley Street. And I know you don't have the history, so you won't be able to answer this question directly, but going down there, as maybe some councillors are aware, Walmsley Street comes down from Cedar, makes a 90-degree turn, and ends in a stub within probably 20 feet from the edge of Mr. Carswell's property, and yet was never extended to service that lot. And I've always wondered why it would have ended in a stub. Do you have any recollection or understanding of why it would have ended there and not been extended to service this lot?
My understanding is that it was not extended by the municipality, that one of the private property owners, similar to, I'm going to refer to Cumberland and Gowrie, where they're using an unopened right-of-way to access their property. They have done some improvements to the right-of-way to allow them better access to the property. And so the stub was not created by the municipality. In fact, much of that stub is actually on a closed right-of-way, so it's not actually even open.
Right. So in other words, in the case of Gowrie and Cumberland, thank you, the private property owners were in fact doing some improvements, and we ultimately gave them permission to do some further improvements in order to prove access to their property.
That is correct.
Okay.
I would believe that this stub is exactly the same situation.
Okay.
At some point, improvements were undertaken in that area for that reason.
Do you think, should Mr. Carswell agree to undertake some necessary work in order to extend our stub to service his property with sufficient frontage to make a driveway, would that be something in that instance then that Public Works could support?
Through the Mayor to Council, I'm not sure that I would say support is the most appropriate response. As you know, we argued against
I do know that.
Cumberland and Gowrie for the simple reason that our official plan and provincial policy doesn't recommend this. So from I'm going to say a purely technical point of view, staff aren't able to support that. Should Council wish that to go forward, staff will certainly facilitate that going forward, as we did with Gowrie, with Gowrie and Cumberland.
All right, thank you very much for that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You, Councillor Height, please.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. I guess my question would have to go to Mr. Baird. I'm reading the input on the next page, on page 465, and I'm wondering, when I read that, I'm kind of shocked, actually. A neighbor is saying that they have done all their grading on their lot, and they're basically sending all their drainage to this lot, and they don't recommend that we allow them to build the council because they require this lot to flood them out. Right? And that if they raise the ground level, well, they might have the flooding problem that they had before running it off to their neighbor's property. So my question, Mr. Mayor, is did we issue a permit for that?
Mr. Baird?
Mr. Mayor, did we issue a permit as in a building permit?
Some kind of permit where they can just slope the water off onto their neighbor?
Well, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to defer to the planner who wrote this report. I'm not able to answer your question, sir.
Through the mayor, I'm not aware of any permits that were issued to this property. Are you speaking to the letter from the neighbor? Yeah. So if there were any grading permits issued, that would fall under our Public Works Division. So we do not have any planning applications that relate to permits.
Where would it fall under, the permit?
Through the chair, it would fall under our Public Works Division.
Through the Mayor to Council, That group is now back in Development and Cultural Services due to the changes.
I'm getting dizzy with my head turning here.
That being said, the grading permits that were historically being referred to would not have been issued because this would have been a case of fill that was being done on their property. They didn't reconstruct the home. So a grading permit wouldn't have been required for the work. Sorry. There was no permit required under the grading bylaw at the time that that work was undertaken.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further to staff? Is the applicant or agent in attendance? Thank you. Is there anyone in attendance that wishes to speak in support of the proposed application? And of course, Mr. Carswell, the applicant, if you wish to speak, you certainly be allowed to speak first, sir.
Paul Carswell. I've been in Turkey Point for 28 years, own both the lots. My adjacent neighbor that is complaining about me raising the land, he rebuilt his cottage 5 or 6 years ago. I wasn't aware that he drained it to my lot, but seems quite unfair, and I don't know how he got through that, but he did, and I do have water there. But Turkey Point itself is a lot of water. And the Ferris Street drain is full of water. Not too often is it not. Any drainage plan or anything that we put forward would make sure we abide by the laws and the bylaws to make that happen. But ask for your serious consideration to pass this and allow us to build on our lot. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Carswell? Councillor Oliver, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Paul, for your comments. You heard Ms. Robinson speaking briefly about some work would have to be done, obviously, in order to raise Walmsley Street up beyond the stub in order to give you frontage, albeit on an unopened, unimproved road.
Through a driveway.
Yes.
Right.
If we were to grant this permit, is it your understanding, are you prepared to undertake that work at your expense in order to accomplish getting a driveway to the front
Yes.
of your lot?
To the end of the stub, as
To the
you
end of the stub?
previously mentioned, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else in attendance who wishes to speak in support of the proposed application? Is there anyone in attendance who wishes to speak in opposition or in general to this application? Anything further from this council? Councillor Columbus.
Yes, over to Ms. Robinson. Councillor Oliver had offered a question to Mr. Carswell. Just wonder, Lee, would this road, the improvements that would have to be made by the applicant, would they have to be built to a certain standard required by the county, or can they just put a laneway in?
Through the mayor to council, if we are treating this similar to Cumberland and Gowrie, where we had a very similar situation, they would not be constructing a municipal road to municipal standards. They would simply be installing a driveway to private property that crossed the municipal property. So it would be, there are standards with respect to driveways, but given that this is that, it would be a gravel driveway standard, which is, I'm sure, what he wishes to put in to gain access to his property anyway.
Thank you.
Councillor Brunton, please.
Yeah, just through you, Mayor Luke, to Lee. Lee, I believe it's Mr. Valley's working on the drainage reports there. Are we any closer to accomplishing anything? I understand it's very difficult.
Through the mayor to council, yes, we are experiencing some difficulties. We're hopeful that in the spring we'll be able to have another meeting with respect to that section of drain.
Well, if and I say if because I have spoke with Mr. Valley on this issue, and I know he said it's very difficult, but if he came up with something that was suitable, do you think we could allow that to go ahead at that time? Like if the drainage could be improved? Would that suffice you?
Through the mayor I apologize, I'm not following your question.
Well, I understand there's a couple of drains down there, municipal drains, correct, that he's working on?
That is correct.
And is this area one of them?
Yes, it is.
Okay, if he comes up with, and I know I say if, a solution, would that suffice your concerns with drainage in that area that would allow this lot to perhaps proceed? Is that fair to ask?
I think I'm going to try to convey the information that I think you're looking for, but maybe perhaps not actually answering the question. When the application came forward, Public Works' concern was we did not want the right-of-way to be sold because we know that we need it for drainage purposes. So anything that allows us to retain it most certainly satisfies Public Works that we're able to retain it. With respect to the driveway, if council's desirous of allowing it to go ahead, staff will certainly facilitate that, and we'll certainly work with the property owner to ensure that there's sufficient room left in the right-of-way for us to be able to address any kind of drainage issues with respect to the municipal drain, as well as still facilitate the location of a driveway to his property.
Okay, and if that is resolved, does that solve your problems? If she's happy, are you happy?
Through the mayor, the way that the planning staff look at it is we look at the policies that are relevant today and the land that's in front of us today. So at this time, we're not supportable. If it comes back at another time, once that is taken care of, then we would look at that again. But still, the issue remains that it's not an opened or year-round maintained road. And according to the official plan, it's required for development.
And either was the one in Dover, right? Thank you.
Councillor Sonnenberg?
Thank you. Through you to planners. Usually in proposals such as this, a septic system design is incorporated in the plan. I don't see one here. What do you suppose the applicant has in mind?
Through the chair, the building division has commented it is the owner's responsibility that they can fit a septic system on their property, and I would defer that to the applicant. He may have some more details on that.
Could we ask the applicant that question?
Your question is, I know it relates to the septic system. I'm
Yes.
not-
How are you going to handle your septage is my question.
Mr. Carswell?
The plan would be to put in a septic system with weeping tiles. There's a lot of property there that can be done. Does that answer your question?
Well, that's an answer, but it's been my thoughts that Turkey Point is too low for that kind of a septic system.
Well, I think if I may, for clarification to staff, if you don't get approval for a septic system, you won't get a building permit, correct?
Through the chair, yes, that's
You don't get a
correct.
building permit, you don't get a cottage. I can go on and on, I'll stop there. I mean, you have to have a septic system approval or you don't get a building permit. Thank you, Councillor Sonnenberg. Anything else from council? I will need a motion to close our public meeting. Black has moved, Oliver has seconded. We now close the public meeting. Those in favor? Carried. Council, what's your wishes here? Councillor Oliver.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm prepared to move that the application be approved, and then if there is a seconder, obviously there may be some more discussion about it, and I'd like to speak a bit further.
Do I have a seconder for the motion to approve? Councillor Height has seconded it. Councillor Oliver has moved. I'm going to quickly just go over the motion. Application of Paul Edward Carswell, 6 Fair Street, Turkey Point, affects the lands, Lot 116, Plan 190, Charlottesville, Norfolk County, amend the Norfolk County official plan and our Norfolk County zoning bylaw 1Z 2014. File numbers there be approved. Councillor Oliver to the motion, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate what staff did with the staff report. I would have preferred to see a either a non-recommendation or a recommendation for approval, obviously. But I understand where the planning staff came from. It is, in my opinion, identical to what we dealt with the Cumberland Gowery scenario. In fact, even less significant, if you like, in terms of what we were conceding on the quality of the access and the road than Gowery Cumberland was in Port Dover. It's always struck me odd that in a situation like this where an existing lot was there, it was shown on a plan as being accessed by Walmsley Street, and yet at no point was Walmsley Street ever constructed down in there. Obviously, it's very, very wet, so perhaps that's why. But nonetheless, this existing legitimate lot of record, if you like, has been there, and the property owner, I think, deserves the right to be able to build on it if, in fact, he can do so. I appreciated Ms. Robinson's comments that if it were brought up to a driveway standard that would allow him to have access, that's something that her staff, her department would work with him to do. And he's prepared to incur that expense. We know that. Even if we do grant this permit tonight, as Councillor Sonnenberg brought up and staff responded, he's going to require a building permit, he's going to require a septic permit, he's going to require a permit from LPRCA, none of which he has now, and all of which he would have to acquire if and when he gets this approval from us in terms of granting this relief. So I think, Mr. Mayor, it's and again, I do want to again say, and I've studied the Ferris Street Drain Report in considerable detail. I've attended the meetings, I've discussed it with our staff at some length. What I think Mr. Carswell is actually requesting will in no way detract from the ultimate construction of the Ferris Street Drain. In fact, it would be my opinion that some filling on the south side of our road allowance in that location will happen in any event if the drain is constructed by virtue of where they're proposing to put the actual swale. So I think it would be completely compatible with the ultimate intention to do the Ferris Street Drain, should we ever be able to convince a majority of property owners down there to support it, and that's a big if. But I think that's at this point kind of irrelevant to this application, and I hope that Council will see its way clear to approve this, as we did with the Gowery Cumberland one in Port Dover. Thank you.
Councillor Black?
The opposing view, I won't support it, and I won't support it because of all the items, the list of items that staff have explained in the report. First of all, in my opinion, it's overdevelopment. They want 28% coverage where there's only 15% permitted. The area of Turkey Point is already in itself overdeveloped, in my opinion. There's no frontage on this property, and we do have policy that says that we don't allow buildings to be built without having proper access onto a municipal road. There isn't any. Fire would have problems responding to an incident when the roads are not maintained. So we've got a problem with the fire. We all know that there is significant drainage problems. They have not been resolved because the people will not get together. For whatever reason, they want to drain the property but will not go along with a proper design to do it. I'm not sure you can properly drain that area. They've indicated that this could be precedent setting, and they do not meet the requirements for development under Section 3 of the provincial policy statement. And I think the last comment, the application represents bad planning and is not in keeping with protecting the public good or safety. The amendment could set precedents and affect other properties in Norfolk County for lots without adequate frontage. I think there's enough reasons there to not support this.
Councillor Brunton?
Thank you, Mayor Luke. I'm kind of wanting to go down the middle of the road here. I think we follow staff's recommendation and refuse it, it's a done issue in terms of, unless he comes back at a future date after we solve the drainage problem. And if we solve the drainage problem, he can come back, correct? Make another application? Is that safe to say?
Through the chair, yes, that is correct.
I like to, and I know the problems down there. I've been down there for years, and I guess my question is, could we defer the application and wait till we solve the drainage issue? And this gentleman wouldn't have to reapply with all the fees we've just passed in our fee bylaw. Would he be in line to not repay them and come forward with his application again? Can we do that?
Through the chair, the application can be deferred for up to 1 year without having to repay.
I believe our engineer said that possibly in the spring we're going to get the final reports from Mr. Valley, I believe. I'm not saying he can solve the problem, but it might be a little more clear for us and that gentleman. Is that possible?
Through the chair, I would direct that question over to Lee.
Through the mayor to council, I don't believe that if you're going to choose to defer it for that reason, that we're going to have any, I don't believe anything that we will determine in the spring as a result of that report will be substantially different than what we know now. We know that we need a portion of that. We're not talking a huge municipal road with a large traveled surface that we'd be proposing in that, and staff are satisfied that we would be able to preserve enough of that right-of-way to allow that to proceed at this point. I'm not sure that deferring it would accomplish anything at this point. Staff, again, have I'm going to say the basis for the request refusal is that it isn't in keeping with provincial policy or with our official plan. It's not really a drainage-related matter. Staff's only concern with respect to the drainage was that we did not sell off any of that right-of-way because we really do need that for the drainage. I don't believe we need 100% of it, but we would like to maintain ownership of that to allow us to have that drainage, but we can certainly work with the property owner to put a driveway in at this time.
Well, thank you, Mayor Luke. I wasn't clear on that before then. I changed my opinion on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Height.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. Personally, I find moving ahead with this, it's a good solution for a perplexing problem. Here we have a lot that's been landlocked because at some point in time, the road wasn't put through, so we have a leftover stub. That stub is being used for drainage. So, yeah, there could have been some common sense used back then, not put a road, flood out the neighboring properties. Good idea. On this hand, we have a lot that's being dumped on by the neighbors, and he's paying taxes and unable to build. In this case, running the roadway across the right-of-way for county, we get the best of both worlds. We still retain the lot for drainage purposes, should Turkey Point ever come up with the impossible flooding drain plan. And now we get a tax base from a cottage that's there as opposed to, I don't know, $100 a year for a lot that nobody can use other than a drainage issue. You know, this project isn't going to go ahead this time of year. Obviously, it's going to have to go through for other approvals, Conservation Authority approvals. Construction won't start, so that gives you till spring until you can try to address the Turkey Point drainage issue. But other than that, I see this as a good proposal, and it's a good compromise, Mr. Mayor.
Any other comments? Lee, I have just one question, a motion I can't debate in the chair, but I can ask a question. I know when we dealt with Gowrie Street in Port Dover, was there not any type of condition that we had concerning maintenance or access is my question here.
Through the mayor to council, in order to do any work on our right-of-way, the applicant needs to fill out an application for a permit to do that work.
Okay.
And that covers off all of those things, and any conditions are included in that permit.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Any other comments? The motion as presented by Oliver and Height is for approval. I'm going to call the question. Those in favor of approval? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those opposed? 1, 2, 3. The motion is carried. All right, let's go to our last application under this public meeting. I am on page 473. Staff report DCS 1798, general zoning bylaw amendments to Norfolk County zoning bylaw 1Z 20-14. Pardon?
Yep, page 467, Bill.
I'm on 467, yes. You there?
I'm there.
I will now open the public meeting on staff report DCS 17-98. Hi Shannon, how are you? This is a big one, you ready? It's all yours. Your report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon to Mr. Mayor and council, staff, and members of the public. This application or amendment is with respect to some general zoning amendments that are being proposed to the Norfolk County zoning bylaw. There are a number of proposals that are being considered at this time, and these proposals have been brought forward through items raised through various applications over the last year, through working with the bylaw itself, and through some enforcement matters, as well as items that have been raised to staff by council. In terms of the items, the bylaw is structured in, the bylaws are structured into 3 bylaws. There is a section for definitions. There's a bylaw that deals with parking and general provisions, and also a bylaw that deals with uses. So in terms of the proposals that are being put forward, their definitions are for bunkhouses, chain houses, driveways, landscape areas, and outdoor event space. In terms of uses, we are looking at some urban residential zones, maximum permitted accessory building size in the agricultural area, general uses within the rural commercial zone, zoning provisions for crematoriums, which includes both the general industrial zone and the community institutional zone, prohibiting drive-throughs within our CBD or downtown areas, as well as a number of parking provisions, including parking locations, parking of recreational vehicles, new parking provisions for group homes, as well as parking for outdoor events, and driveway provisions. Also, you'll see there's lots of record which are being included in this. Generally, the lots of record are just items that are being deleted from the zoning bylaw. Planning staff did host an open house on November 22nd, and we received a good turnout on that and had some good discussion and items raised from there. As well as there was a number of discussions with public works, planning staff, as well as building staff in terms of the overall. And the items were presented to our developer information group, as well as our agricultural advisory board and the tourism and economic development board. As part of this, you'll also, I distributed earlier a package of 4 emails that were received in post the report being finalized. One gentleman who was not able to attend tonight, but is generally supportive of the matter of regarding parking locations, and in particular not permitting parking within or parking on a front lawn. One was an objection in terms of impact on Hastings Drive and wishing to see the matters deferred until the OMB hearing has been completed in January. Another item was in terms of some of the notice and clarity of the planning amendments. And lastly was with respect to recreational vehicle parking, in particular to the lakeshore areas. I'm not intending to go through each of the proposed changes at this time. They are included in the report, but I am happy to discuss them if there's matters of interest, so we can kind of talk on it on that basis. And as well, if any discussions through the bylaws, we can look, planning staff are happy to work in terms of any amendments that create a more agreeable and workable document. In terms of the parking as it's structured right now, so parking would be recognized or with respect to on driveways for single detached, semi-detached, and duplex dwellings. That could be amended, so it speaks to urban residential zones, so it's a little bit more focused in terms of the urban areas. As stated, planning staff have worked diligently in terms of creating bylaws that are both workable and creating opportunities within the county. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions or speak on specific items as they come, but planning staff are recommending support of the applications. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I don't have it here. Thank you, Ms. Van Dalen. Questions from council? I see Black, Wells, and Oliver. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Luke, and through you to Shannon. Thank you for all your hard work. There's a lot of work in here, I can see it, and the rest of the staff. And appreciate the work that you've done on the parking, because I've gotten a lot of complaints about that. And just wondered though, on the minimum landscape, you've made reference to urban residential areas, but you don't make reference to the urban area on 4.2 or 4.6. Do you mean the urban areas only in 4.2 and 4.6?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I'm just taking a second just to
You go ahead. No,
familiarize myself with it.
That's fine.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. In terms of that, the definition for minimum landscape area is to provide some structure in terms and definition in terms of 4.2. So it can be applied. It would apply countywide, but in particular because under 4.2 you have item C, which says a landscape area. So it's just creating a framework for what that landscape area is. Does that answer your question, Councillor Black?
No.
Okay, sorry.
4.2, right above the minimum landscape. Okay, I was making reference to minimum landscape because in there, in the proposed, it refers to within urban residential type 1 to 4 zones. Well, I wondered, above that, it says location of parking on a lot, 4.2.3. There's no reference to whether or not this is referring to just the urban area or all of Norfolk County. And the same with 4.6.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. In terms of, thank you for that clarity. I understand where you're coming from now. For 4.2, the 4.2.3A would apply kind of on a county-wide basis, but we can amend it if council so desires to specify it a little bit more to speak more specifically to the urban one or the urban zones, if that's a wish. It was kept general through this bylaw to allow some flexibility in terms of being applied on a county basis, but if it's so desired to scope it down a little bit, we could make that
the reason
work.
I'm asking is, like, I haven't heard from any complaints from anyone but in Simcoe. And it was prohibited in Simcoe days, and then it was changed and started to get the complaints. So I'm not sure if it's a concern everywhere else. So if it can be, I don't know, maybe my fellow colleagues, it is a concern. I don't know. But if it isn't, maybe it can be redesigned to focus on where the problems are. So you said there's some flexibility, so thank you.
Councillor Wells.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I'm a little bit confused on page 474 under parking for recreational vehicles. I understand right now 4.6, existing. Vehicles that do not have a current license plate shall be prohibited. That I understand. I don't have a problem with that. It's the next one, parking of recreational vehicles. Notwithstanding above, may be parked on a lot from May the 1st and October the 31st, provided they have a license. But down at the very bottom, it says, shall not be parked on a lot for more than 72 consecutive hours. So I am somewhat confused. Can they park or can they not park? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, in terms of that, what this provision for 4.6 would be replacing the existing provision that's currently in the bylaw with these new criteria. And what it would allow is for parking on a lot of a recreational vehicle, but that parking may not exceed the 72 hours. So they can park within that time frame, but essentially it's looking at so that recreational vehicles cannot be stored on a lot on a continual basis.
And when we refer to a lot, you're referring to an owner's property? Like I have a piece of property. I cannot park my recreational vehicle on my property that I pay taxes for more than 3 days. Is that what that is saying?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct. A lot is defined as a property within the zoning bylaw.
And what would be the rationale for that decision or recommendation?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, in terms of that recommendation, there was some items and discussions that had come forward from our Building and Bylaw Enforcement Division in terms of placement and parking of recreational vehicles and storage of the recreational vehicles on a permanent basis, in terms of some sight lines and potential issues in terms of overall storage and that sort of thing. So it was an item that was raised to our Building and Bylaw Enforcement as a problem from their perspective.
Well, I don't support that, but I thank her for her explanation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Oliver.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. My first question kind of relates to the same matter. Am I correct, Shannon, in remembering, and it's before your time, but I think, Mr. Mayor, since I've been on council, this matter of the parking of recreational vehicles on urban residential lots came up once before at least, and I believe council of the day chose not to implement a prohibition. Is that correct? So that's why our current policy is somewhat permissive?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, unfortunately I can't respond to that directly as I wasn't here at that time, so that bylaw would have been drafted prior to my happenings with the county. But again, I would just reiterate that this was an item that was raised, and it does speak more specifically to some of the urban settings and those type of
can you add to
opportunities.
that?
Just help Shannon out here. Council may recall, there was a problem when RV owners park their vehicles there, with the exception of the 2 weeks they might be away in the summer or the winter away, that they were in the front yard, side yard, all through town. And that was really problematic from a neighbor's perspective. There was a bylaw previously in place that permitted those owners to bring it out of storage in the springtime, clean it up, get it prepared for a journey, and you had 72 hours. That was, it could come and go, but you couldn't keep it there in place for more than 72 hours. So this is an attempt to put some regulation back into some of these problems that the bylaw has been dealing with by letting people store them for up to 72 hours within that time frame from May 1st to October 31st, but not having them there all winter long with a tarp over them, blocking sight lines and pedestrian traffic and so on. These problems exist whether or not certain councillors receive those calls. They do exist and occur throughout the county on a regular basis.
Thank you for that, and I apologize to staff for having my back to them. My second question on that same particular item, I have had, as per Councillor Black's comment, I have had some calls from constituents of mine in the resort communities along the lakeshore, Normandale, Turkey Point, et cetera, where I would suggest the parking of an RV for longer than 72 hours perhaps is much more typical, if you like, or expected than it might be in an urban setting. So my question could be, if we decide to accept this relative to urban residential, but not resort residential, or perhaps even hamlet residential, is that a compromise for us?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, absolutely, that is an opportunity that could be explored if council so wishes, that that be amended to state more specifically urban residential zones.
Thank you for that. That would be a suggestion of mine, Mr. Mayor, and we'll see what other councillors feel about that. My other question relating to the parking provisions on page 473 that has also been brought up, again, it talks about parking of vehicles on the landscape area, in other words, on the lawn. Would that, again, only apply, and Councillor Black asked about this, could it be just simply within urban areas, i.e. residential lots within an urban setting? Because it seems to me it would not be appropriate to have that prohibition on a farm where there's residential use around the residence, nor would it likely be appropriate around a vacation home. So once again, was that intended, or could we modify it such that it only applies to parking on lawns and landscape areas within urban residential settings or zones?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, absolutely, again, that can be amended so it speaks more specifically to urban lots, so that it addresses that matter. Definitely agricultural kind of properties in terms of their size and stuff like that were not intended to have those regulations. I would just flag that given some of the density and the close proximity of some of our resort residential areas and our hamlet residential areas, that may be something that council may want to consider in terms of including those, but that can be drafted as so council desires.
Thank you for that, Shannon. And I agree with you. We've all been down to, whether it's Turkey Point or Long Point, in the summer, and it's not uncommon to have 3 or 4 vehicles on someone's cottage lot who are there either at a day function or there for the weekend or whatever. And while we know that's not ideal, I'm not aware that we've had many complaints about it with respect to the resort residential community. So I guess I kind of hate to impose that kind of restriction if we haven't had complaints in the resort communities, and I'd like to be told by others if we have. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Height?
Thank you, Mayor Luke. I'm going to start off at section 4.2. I'm a bit confused by how it's all worded here with the parking, and I do hope this is urban and not rural, because we'll never hear the end of it. But it says here, not more than 1 parking space may be located within the required front yard. So if you have a double garage with pavement in front, you can only park 1 car there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, in terms of the required front yard is a 6-meter setback, typically a 6-meter setback from the property line to the dwelling or to the front of the dwelling. So it would depend on the property in particular. Generally, when we are looking at subdivisions and going through that process, new construction and single detached dwellings or whatnot, any residential has to provide parking as for the required parking, which is wholly contained on the property, whether it be 2 spaces, if it's a double garage, 2 spaces within the garage or in front of it. Typically, the way it's designed, they are within that required, or they do meet that required front yard setback. It allows an additional space within that required 6 meters.
Okay, so just to be clear, if I have a double car garage, I can park 2 cars in front of it on the pavement on my laneway, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and so then, item C, the vehicles shall not park within any landscape area, and landscape areas defined as trees and shrubs and flowers, and gardeners everywhere in Norfolk will celebrate this, but does that happen a lot? Why are you putting it there? Is it for lawns?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, in terms of that, yes, there have been a number of complaints raised in terms of parking. And so in terms of trying to define where or how on a property a vehicle can park, there needed to be some sort of definition of landscape area to correspond and assist in terms of that parking provision. So that's where the landscape area comes from, and whether it be grass or trees or whatever kind of thoughts may arise, but it's trying to maintain some of that visual amenity, open space for residential lots, in particular in the urban area.
Okay, and my next one, Mr. Mayor, is section 4.6 is back for parking for recreational vehicles. I assume this doesn't mean ATVs and quads and all the other stuff. We're talking about trailers and RVs in this case?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. In terms of the recreational vehicles, they are defined in our zoning bylaw currently, and it does speak to your campers, your boaters, your recreational vehicles, your boat trailers, and those types of items.
Okay. And this is the residential zone in an urban area?
Currently, it does apply to any residential zone, but we can amend that as per some of the previous discussions that we've had on this item to say any urban residential zone.
So even hamlets?
Hamlet is not considered an urban zone. But we could, if council wants to include it, we can. It would all be on the discussion, but a hamlet is not considered an urban zone.
Okay, so I don't know how you're ever going to police the 72-hour consecutive trailer parking anywhere in Norfolk County.
To you, Councillor Height, in terms of that 72 hours, that would come through a complaint-driven basis and allow our enforcement department an opportunity to at least step in and speak to the property owner or follow up where needed. Because currently they don't have that leverage within the bylaw to speak to any of the property owners with respect to the parking of recreational vehicles.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I guess my last one is section 11 is the change house on hazard lands. You're asking for setbacks. They seem very substantial for the types of lots where they would be in existence. So do we have setbacks like that for sheds?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, in terms of the change house, it is an existing permitted use within our hazard land zones, and there are a variety of property sizes that it would apply to. So currently, the hazard land zone does not have any setback requirements within the zone because typically buildings and structures are not permitted within the hazard land zone. So what this provision would do would include some, the 6-meter setback is pretty standard in terms of a front yard, and the 3-meter is a little bit more than a typical accessory building where it's traditionally or typically 1.2 meters. But again, given some of the property sizes and locations through discussions with our building department, the 3 meters was considered appropriate.
Okay, so my initial question was, do we do this for sheds?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there are setback provisions for sheds, for accessory buildings within the zoning bylaw. The 6 meters would apply because they're not permitted in the required front yard. Any of the other yards would be 1.2 meters as opposed to the 3 that's being proposed through this amendment.
Okay. Are they permitted in the HL zone?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, they are not.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Columbus.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Got a few here. Going back to page 474 of the agenda, section 4.6 again, the recreational vehicles. And my question is with respect to non-recreational vehicles, for example, construction trailers and cargo containers that are on wheels, that type of thing. How do we handle or differentiate those items as trailers versus the recreational vehicle?
To you, Councillor Columbus, in terms of the construction vehicles or that sort of thing, they are not covered under this. They're not considered a recreational vehicle. I know that item has been through discussion on the recreational vehicles. Our building department has flagged this as a potential issue, so you may see that coming forward in one of the next versions of our update, but at this time they are separate. They are not included in terms of the recreational vehicle definition with the zoning bylaw.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Going to page 469, under bunkhouse, under the heading proposed, the last sentence, a mobile home or recreational vehicle may be used for the purpose of a bunkhouse. Do we mean a recreational vehicle, or do we mean a trailer? Like a recreational vehicle, I was thinking that perhaps something with a steering wheel could be actually used as a bunkhouse when I read that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's what is currently existing in our bylaw. So that is not being changed at all. It is permitted in terms of the health unit and building code for camp for seasonal workers through that provision. So we're not proposing to affect that. The only change as part of the bunkhouse definition is just changing it from operation on which the seasonal workers are employed. We're planning, the intent is to delete that from the definition because we are aware that there's a number of situations or where farmers share bunkhouses or the workers travel to various farms to complete whatever work needs to be done. So in terms of the flexibility for the farming community, we're removing that portion of the definition, but the balance remains the same.
Okay, thank you for that. And moving to page 477, section 718, in the general industrial zone, it's about crematorium. And under the proposed, you go to item F, minimum setback to any residential zone, school, community center, or place of recreation is 70 meters, which is basically 230 feet. The question I have is, when a farmer incinerates livestock that has died, do you know what the distance is whereby you have to stay away from a neighboring property if you're using that system to incinerate livestock?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no. Sorry, I don't
I
have
was
that
thinking,
answer.
from what I understand, it's quite a bit further than 70 meters, so I just wonder if you can check that out.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we can definitely follow up. In terms of the 70 meters, where that number was pulled from was the Ministry of the Environment's D-Series guidelines in terms of a Class 1 industrial use.
Thank you.
Councillor Black?
Mayor Luke, I think I'm going to wait until the debate occurs.
Okay. Councillor Brunton?
Thank you, Mayor Luke. Just very quickly, back on 474, so I'm clear with the parking of recreational vehicles, the 72-hour, I have no problem with that in the urban areas, but I do have a problem if it becomes into the what's the word I want? Resort areas. Yeah, so I think that's a problem for me. And if I may, on page 478, hazard land change house. How do you determine, and I read this here, it says a change house, in B, it says change house is required to have a minimum 3-meter setback to an interior lot line or rear lot line. How do you determine the rear lot line if it's 60 feet out in the lake? How do you, is that the lot line? That's his lot of, that would be his property line.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct. That would be the rear lot line. So as long as he's got the 3 meters, or as long as the property owner has 3 meters, they can kind of place it anywhere within that property, the lot portion in itself.
Okay, and the definition of a change house, as long as if you can't live in it, basically, is what it says, but it can be any size? Or no? Like the definition of it will just say you can't live in it, or non-habitable, right? Correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that is correct. The definition doesn't have any specific size limitations on it, just in terms of the zone and whatever permits are required from there.
Okay, correct me here, we did approve some change houses that were, I guess, under the 100 square feet, because they didn't have to get a building permit on Hastings, and I'm just wondering, with this proposal, they would have to get a, would they just still go to Long Point, or would they not have to go to get a permit? Just provide the setbacks?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, in terms of that, if they're still under that 100 square feet, they would not require a building permit, so everything would still remain status quo that way. We're not proposing to change anything in terms of that process. It's just creating a definition for change houses and then creating some setbacks for them so that they're not either right on property lines, that there is a little bit of separation of the change houses for lots, because we are seeing them in other circumstances and other locations through variance applications or that sort of thing. Had a change house that's all glass. So it's just trying to create some framework in terms of definition for the overall intent of a change house.
Okay, but that changes in terms of the setback, front and side yard, rear yard, that's new for under 100 square feet now, is it not?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is new, but the
Right.
same circumstances would apply to any shed or accessory building that's under 100 square feet, whether it's considered a change house as part of the hazard land zone, or if it was a 80 square foot shed on an urban lot. There are still setbacks required within those zones for accessory buildings, so it's just creating a bit of consistency there when we're dealing with the accessory buildings.
Okay, my last question is, and this may be, I'm off base on this, it's accessory uses for residential uses. Does that in any way prohibit home occupation?
Mr. Mayor, sorry, Councillor, if you could just refer to what
Page
section?
471, 3.2.1. Does that, and maybe I'm off base on that, but, and I think of areas where people have large outbuildings which are used in some cases for offices or small businesses. Does this in any way affect home occupation?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, it does not. Those provisions and allowances for home occupations or home industries still apply. It's just we do see a number of variance applications, and council has seen zoning applications as well in terms of increasing the size of accessory buildings in the agricultural area. We recognize that in terms of the need and the property makeup and characteristics of the agricultural area, a larger accessory building makes sense, but the balance of the home industry and home occupation provisions would still apply, so those opportunities exist standing outside this the proposed increase to the accessory buildings.
So in some, and there are some that I'm aware of, in the urban area where you have a home and a separated garage with an upstairs that, I don't know, could be 1,000 square feet. People operate a business out of there. Now, some of it may not be advertised, but is that home occupation, or is that, am I getting off base on that? Should that be a rezoning issue?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it would determine in terms of the property in itself what allowances they have. Typically, a home industry is something that occurs in a detached building, whereas a home occupation occurs within the primary residence itself. So there could be non-compliance with the zoning bylaw, but again, that would be only flagged to our enforcement division through complaint basis. And they may have legal non-conforming status. There could be a number of factors at play with some of those opportunities.
Thank you.
Councillor Height?
Thank you, Mayor Duke. Just one question, and I'll get on with some motions, I assume. On section 647, I think it was rural commercial, page 476. Is auto sales, would that be allowed on that? Wherever that went. The rural commercial zone?
To you, Councillor Height, automobile sales is not something that's currently permitted within the rural commercial zone, and it's not something that we were